Paripadika Charja Stotara Sat Shri Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupada Paramahansa Paripadika Charja Stotara Sat Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Jagho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Shri Shri Vrindavan Dhama Ki Jai. Navadvip Dhama Ki Jai. Shri Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Gangamaya Ki Jai. Jamuna Maya Ki Jai. Gaurnitai Ki Jai. Shri Shri Krishna Balaram Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Radhagiri Hari Ki Jai. Shri Shri New Govardhana Dhamma Ki Jai. Shama Veda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Narayanam namaskricham naram chaivam narotamam devim saraswatim vyasam tacho jayam udirayat nastaparayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shlokir bhakti bhavati naishtiki mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim yatkri pataraham bande Shri Guru dinatarane. We're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, second chapter, 7th verse. Is that right? Kas Tvam Tva Nadritya Puranuchitanam Paranuchitan Pite Pashun Asatim Nana Kuryat Pashyan Janam Patitam Paitaranyam Sva Karmajan Paritapan Jisanam Kastvam Tavandritya Paruna Chintam Vite Pashuna Sitamam Akuryat Pasyanjanam Patita Vaitaranyam Sakarmajam Paritapan Jisunam Kastam Tvana Dritya Puranuchintam Rite Pashuna Satam Namakiryat Pashyan Janmam Patitam Vaitaranyam Sakarmajam Paritparam Jusanam Kaha, repeat. Who else? Tam, that. To, but. Anadritya, by neglecting. Parananuchintam, transcendental thoughts. Rite, without. Pashun, the materialist. Asatim, in the non-permanent. Nama, name. Kuryat, will adopt. Pashyan, seeing definitely. Janam, the general mass of people. Patitam, fallen. Vaitaranyam, in Vaitarani, the river of suffering. Svakarmajan, produced from one's own work. Paritapan, suffering. Chusanam, being overtaken by. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Who else but the gross materialist will neglect such transcendental thought and take to the non-permanent names only, seeing the mass of people fallen in the river of suffering as the consequence of accruing the result of their own work? Who else, repeat, but the gross materialist will neglect such transcendental thought and take to the non-permanent names only, Seeing the mass of people fallen in the river of suffering as the consequence of accruing the result of their own work. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In the Vedas, it is said that persons who are attached to demigods to the exclusion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are like the animals who follow the herdsman, even though they are taken to the slaughterhouse. The materialists, like animals, also do not know how they are being misdirected by neglecting the transcendental thought of the Supreme Person. No one can remain vacant of thought. It is said that an idle brain is a devil's workshop, because a person who cannot think in the right way must think of something which may bring about disaster. The materialists are always worshipping some minor demigods, although this is condemned in Bhagavad Gita 7:20. As long as a person is illusioned by material gains, he petitions the respective demigods to draw some particular benefit, which is, after all, illusory and non-permanent. The enlightened transcendentalist is not captivated by such illusory things. Therefore, he is always absorbed in the transcendental thought of the Supreme in different stages of realization, namely Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. In the previous verse, it is suggested that one should think of the Supersoul, which is one step higher than the impersonal thought of Brahman, as it was suggested in the case of contemplating the Virat Rupa of the Personality of Godhead. Intelligent persons who can see properly may look into the general conditions of the living entities who are wandering in the cycle of the 8,400,000 species of life, as well as in different classes of human beings. It is said that there is an everlasting belt of water called the river Vaitarani at the entrance of the plutonic planet of Yamaraj, who punishes sinners in different manners. After being subjected to such sufferings, a sinner is awarded a particular species of life according to his deeds in the past. Such living entities are punished by Yamaraj. Such living entities as are punished by Yamaraj are seen in different varieties of conditioned life. Some of them are in heaven, and some of them are in hell. Some of them are Brahmins, and some of them are misers. But no one is happy in this material world, and all of them are either class A, B, or C prisoners, suffering because of their own deeds. The Lord is impartial to all circumstances of the sufferings of the living entities, but to one who takes shelter at his lotus feet, the Lord gives proper protection, and he takes such a living entity back home, back to himself. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langaya tegidam yat kripataraham bande Shri Guru Dinatarane. There's a description of the different hells as A, B, and C. Prabhupada says, no one is happy in this material world, and all of them are either class A, B, or C prisoners, suffering in their own deeds. It makes me think of a drawing I saw once of a person who had been put in prison and was escaping. But after that person escaped, there was another wall to escape from, and that was the wall of material existence, or the Viratani River. So it was like, escaping from prison A, and then finding that there's still prison B and C to overcome. So getting out of prison is not liberation. It's just a temporary situation. And as it's said in the beginning of this chapter, it's the first step in God realization. Sometimes people, they don't think of Krishna except as in the universal form. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna shows the universal form to Arjuna to get him to realize that there's another dimension to this personality that was his friend, his messenger, and his relative, and that is that it's very fearful that he is all the demigods and all the living entities in the whole universe. And when Arjuna saw that the Lord of Death was also involved, and that there was an aspect of Krishna's universal form that is punishing sinners, they go into the mouths and they're they're cut to pieces by the jaws of death, he became very frightened. And he wanted to see Krishna in his normal, so-called normal, two-handed, human-like form. But it takes that for people to realize that God is not only omnipotent and omniscient, but He's everywhere. He's omnipresent. He's in everything. As one of the Gurukul students said in the 60 Minutes broadcast, He's in the rock, He's in the air, He's in the ground, He's everywhere. So people need to see this kind of aspect of Krishna, the universal form. And it's very important, actually. It's a first step, and as Prabhupada was saying in this purport, there's different stages of realization of Godhead: Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan being the highest. Sometimes people they even think that saintly persons have a universal or can manifest universal characteristics. A brief story about this is that I wasn't present, but I was told, and I've heard it on reasonably good authority, that Prabhupada is in a train in a compartment, probably somewhere in India, with a number of his Western disciples. And it so happened that there was a man in the train from that part of the world who asked Prabhupada to, he said, well, you're a saintly person, so show your universal form. And he obviously wasn't initiated into the Krishna consciousness movement. And Prabhupada didn't answer him immediately, but he looked around at his Western disciples and he gestured in the typical fashion of people of that part of the world. And instead of pointing, they just do like this. They use all 5 fingers. And he gestured to the Western devotees, and he said, and the man asked him, he said, so show you, you can do anything. You're a saintly person. Perform some kind of miracle. So the story goes, it's not a story, it's an actual incident, I think. I wasn't there, but I heard it on good authority. Prabhupada gestured to his Western followers, and he told the man, and then he looked at the man and he said, this is my miracle. And it was kind of a miracle that Prabhupada dealt with very, very sinful and strange people in the West. And he even said that they were more interested than his own compatriots, because they weren't full of false ideas about Brahman, and they didn't know anything about Krishna or Brahman. We know that Brahma is the creator, but that he was created by Krishna, and that Krishna is the ultimate authority. So that's one of the things he said. And there's another incident that I read about or heard about in Chaitanya Bhagavat, where, and those of you who have read Chaitanya Bhagavat probably have, it's in the Anchal Kanda, it's near the end. There were a group of dacoits. Dacoits is, I think you know what a dacoit is. It's like the Hindu name for a thief or a rogue or a rascal. They were they made a plan to steal all the jewels from Nityananda, because Nityananda had many golden bracelets and sapphires and rubies and diamonds and decorating his body. So they planned they knew where he was staying, so they planned to go in at night and steal all the jewels. And they were according to the reading, they were interested in some of the dacoits said that I'll take the diamonds. Another one said I'll take the sapphires. Another one said I'll take the rubies. And they were really enthusiastic. There was a gang of them, and they were planning to go in at night and steal all the jewels. Thieves. So they gathered around the house, and their spies, or somehow they learned that Nityananda and company were taking prasadam. They were eating. They said, well, we'll wait till they stop eating and go to bed, and it'll be easier to operate it when it's dark. And it's a custom of criminality to do their nefarious work in the dark, so that they won't be recognized or caught. So what happened, according to Vrindavan Das Thakur, is that they fell into a deep, while they were waiting, they fell into a deep sleep. And then when they awakened, it was daylight out. And one thief said to the other, "Well, who was it that fell asleep first?" And they were arguing among themselves about this. And they said, "Well, don't worry about it. We'll come back." The leader of them told them that, "Don't worry about it. We'll come back another time and loot the place, loot him." So they came back about a week later. And they noticed that there were guards or sentries around the house, and they were very, very tough-looking people with scars, and big people, like 3-4 times the size of each of them. And according to Vrindavan Das Thakur, one of those guards could decimate all of the thieves. And they also had a lot of weapons, and they were parading back and forth, and there were a few of them. So they decided that they wouldn't even try, because they would just get killed probably by these guys. So they said they'll come back in another week when they're gone, and we'll do our dirty work. So they came back about a week or so later, and there were no sentries, and it was nighttime. And so they detected that Nityananda and all his crew were fast asleep. And what happened, according to Vrindavan Das Thakur, is as they approached the house, there was a moat around the house, like a ring of water, and a number of them fell into the moat and got stung by what Vrindavan Das calls giant mosquitoes and scorpions and snakes and all manner of vicious creatures, and then they became blind. I mean, they literally lost their eyesight, all of them. And and the third thing that happened was Indra sent a big downpour of rain, a heavy rainfall on them, and that the rain turned into hail, and it became so difficult for them to maneuver that they just decided to give up. And then at the end of the story, the chief of these dacoits, or the leader of the mob, so to speak, went into the house and apologized to Nityananda and said that he had made a mistake, and that he was very sinful, and that he didn't know that the Lord was all powerful, and would he please forgive him, and so on and so forth. And so, to make a long story short, this head of the dacoits became a devotee of sorts, and he was told that as long as he wouldn't sin again, he would be forgiven. And that's the story. There was another incident that took place in 1967, I think it was, in the United States. There was a very small, weak and introverted devotee, a boy, young and very frail, and he was accosted. This happened in broad daylight by someone who was about 4 times his size, full of muscular and full of scars, and really a tough-looking character, and pinned him against a wall and was about to lay waste to him, when this devotee yelled out as loud as he could, "Nishringadev, Nishringadev!" And suddenly, the number of this was in a residential area, and where there were a lot of apartments buildings. Suddenly, apartment buildings. Some of the windows opened, and the people that were inside started watching this whole thing, and then the attacker became very frightened and looked around, and eventually he just went away. So there's a moral to this story, and a moral to the story about the dacoits, and that moral, if there is a moral, is that Krishna can protect us, even if we're assailed by enemies. There's so many things. There's a verse that Prabhupada often quotes, Samashri that ends in Padam Padam Yad Vi Padam Natesham, that there is danger at every step. There's danger in any medicine. There's danger. There's nuclear war. There's danger literally at every step. Everything we do has a sort of, there's danger involved in this material world. But it shows that if there's a saying that Mare Krishna Rakeke Rake Krishna Mareke, I think is how it goes, that if Krishna wants to save you, no one can kill you, and if Krishna wants to kill you, no one can save you. So that's what this all meant to me, a sort of an average person, newly minted devotee, that if Krishna wants to protect us, we can be protected, even from the greatest danger. And there's danger everywhere. I mean, I have some bad news for all those who are watching this on their screens, that the bad news is that I'm going to be as politically correct as I can be, and you can't use anything that I say against me. But anyways, that's just a side effect of the 20th century, when classes aren't just directed to the people in the room. They should be, and Prabhupada could do it with abandon because he was a pure devotee. But people all over the world are watching and finding faults. I don't mean to find fault myself, but that's the fact of life. And one of the statements that's attributed to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in an article that's about him, that's widely read, is that I want nothing but the best for my worst enemies. I want nothing but the best for my worst enemies. So that's a very advanced stage. And sometimes Prabhupada would talk not sometimes, but almost always, he would talk in such a way that things that were a little bit incomprehensible. He told the story of Sanatana Goswami, who had a touchstone, and his version of a touchstone is something that would turn anything it touched, into gold. And the story is that a man who was a worshipper of Lord Shiva detected that Sanatana Goswami had this touchstone, but he kept it in a pile of garbage. And he asked Sanatana if he could have that, and Sanatana said, "Definitely, you can have it." And then this man was thinking, as he was going away, that why was it in the garbage heap, and why did he give it away so easily? And I'm going to ask him. And he went back and asked Sanatana why the touchstone was, in the garbage, and why he departed with it so easily. And he said, I'll tell you the greatest treasure in the world, but before I tell you what it is, you have to throw that touchstone in the river and completely forget about it. So he did that. And then Sanatana proceeded to tell him that devotional service is the higher pleasure. And I don't know who translated this, but it's said that devotional service is in Nectar of Devotion. It is said, and it's probably a summary study from the Bhagavatam, the 10th chapter. The devotional service is so powerful, so pleasurable, that you could take the one drop of material pleasure and multiply it 1 trillion times. That's the word they use. I don't know who translated it, but 1 trillion times, not 1,000 or 100 or a million, or a billion, but 1 trillion times. One drop multiplied 1 trillion times gives you a little inkling of how pleasurable devotional service is. So it's like another dimension of life that most of us, including myself, can't experience. But it's there. It's written. It's in black and white in the Nectar of Devotion that devotional service is very, very highly pleasurable. Even though we can't understand it, but the reason we're here and the reason we're embracing this unusual way of life is because we believe it's true. If it doesn't happen immediately, it's going to happen at some point. We're very convinced. So Prabhupada convinced us of that. And I've been listening to some of the recordings that were made in Vrindavan when Prabhupada was in his later days, October and November of 1977. And Bhakti Swarup Damodar was a newly minted GBC at that time, and they had right in the Vrindavan temple, the Krishna Balaram temple, a scientific conference of scientists from all over the country, mainly from that part of the country, from Delhi and from Mathura. They were scientists, and they had a conference, and the conference established that there's another dimension to existence other than Darwinian theory of evolution. How did people get here? And Sariputta and other people, Bob Cohen, or we know as Brahmatirtha of Perfect Questions and Perfect Answers, said that there's another dimension, that if we examine the geological record carefully, and Robert Cohen or Brahmatirtha was a geologist at one time, and Sariputta made a present. He's a PhD. He was, the late Sariputta, was a PhD in mathematics from Cornell. They made very strong presentations that there was another dimension to life, that we didn't just get here because of molecular and atomic variations, but there's another dimension, and this was very well received by even the scholars who were very materialistic. They thought, well, they maybe have something there. So this was the beginning of Prabhupada's challenge to the scientific establishment, which most people think is the gospel truth. Then it was written up, it was reported on in the press in that part of the world, that it was successful. So even though Swarup Damodar was very new at that time, because he had a doctorate in chemistry or something like that from one of the universities in California, I should call him the late Swarup Damodar, organized this whole conference, and it was a very successful. So this was the beginning of Prabhupada's challenge to the scientific establishment and to Darwinian evolution, and which went on to become Bhaktivedanta Institute and turned out to be very successful. Although there are always going to be enemies. I was at a conference in one of the universities. I was present there in San Diego, east of San Diego. Not San Diego State. It's a university east of San Diego. It's a very, very highly thought of place. And Sariputta and Duttakarma weren't there. But the person who did most of the early research, his name was Madhavendra Puri, did the presentation. And most of the audience were archaeology students. There were about maybe 25 people there. And there were 3 or 4 of them were professors of archaeology. The students, according to what I saw, were asking very interesting questions, because the research revealed that a lot of the research that geologists and paleontologists did from 1979 to 1996 was just cast into the outer darkness and not reported on. And so then the archaeologists students began to think, well, they already suspected there was something wrong with this Darwinian theory, that in those years something wasn't written, and for almost 160 years the missing link has not been found. So they're asking very good questions of Madhavendra Puri, who made the presentation. And at the end of the talk they came up, and some of them bought books. They had the book of Forbidden Archaeology. But the people who asked challenging questions were the university professors of paleontology and archaeology. And they said, what is this Bhakti? Their questions were like this. They said, what is this Bhaktivedanta Institute? Is this part of the Hare Krishna movement? Those kind of questions. They were very challenging, because they were against anything unusual, especially Hare Krishnas at that time. And so they asked them those. They didn't ask questions. They just challenged the whole thing as being the administrations of a cult, and it was all just kind of bogus. But the students, on the other hand, were very, very serious, and they didn't bat an eye when the Hare Krishnas were mentioned, or the Bhaktivedanta Institute was mentioned, and they took it very seriously. So I could see that even though there was a lot of opposition by the established people, the scientific establishment, to this idea of knowledge filters and cheating going on in the name of science, that many serious students were taking this very seriously. So I'll probably have to end there, and I'll read the verse again. Let's not go on. Who else but the gross materialists will neglect such transcendental thought and take to the non-permanent names only, seeing the mass of people fallen in the river of suffering as the consequence of accruing the result of their own work. So any comments or questions on any of this, or anything that I've said, or just anything? Now's the time. Yes?
You mentioned the statement from Nectar of Devotion, that our devotional service is so much blissful and personal liberation, and we're convinced of it. How to achieve that conviction?
Well, that's why we're here. We're worshiping the deities, we're hearing Srimad Bhagavatam every day, and we're hoping that if we do this long enough, and with enough attention that we'll get to that stage. It may take. We don't care if it takes many lifetimes. It's just that it's part of the sadhana bhakti process, part of devotional service. That we have to be very determined and convinced and willing to undergo hardships if necessary to make it all happen. There's a lot of verses that confirm this. So it's not a simple thing. It's not something that can be ascertained or learned or developed in an instant. It's something that takes a long time, sometimes many lifetimes, but it's worth doing, even if it's very lengthy.
What makes us fall away from the process?
Well, material nature is very strong. The question was what makes us fall away from the process. Material nature is very strong. That's one reason. Another reason is that we're very weak. Another reason is that Krishna is not easily attainable. He says that there's a curtain of Maya surrounding him, so he's not something that we can obtain very easily. And the nature of our enemies in the form of Maya, who has many different forms of people that appear to be very happy, and various forms of sense gratification. They're very powerful, and they're trying to take us away all the time. So those are two reasons why. And we have a certain weakness, and we have a kind of backlog of sinful activity. That's part of what's making things very difficult. So it does happen, and that's why. And as I was saying in the previous class, that sometimes people have ulterior motives. That too much devotion is a symptom of thievery. So that's another thing, that people they just want to be in Krishna consciousness, and they have an ulterior motive. So that's another reason why people fall away. There are many reasons, but those are some of the main ones.
How can we protect ourselves to stay on the path?
Well, we can't protect ourselves. I mean, there's no guarantee of anything. I mean, even one of Prabhupada's closest intimate. I think he was even a servant. I mean, I've said he because I've eliminated half the population of ISKCON. But I got a letter. I was temple president at that time, saying, I regret to inform you that our godbrother so-and-so and so-and-so has become an envious snake. So there's no guarantee. Even if we're associating with Prabhupada, who is very pure, and even though we're sitting in front of the deities and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam every day and bowing down to devotees and carrying on, there's no guarantee of perfection. We just have to do our best. I mean, that's my opinion. And we have to read and chant and know that if we do all these things, that Krishna will help us, if we're sincere. Or we try to be, anyway.
May I add something?
Yes. Go ahead.
Another thing that we can do to keep us steady on the path is to be very alert to not carrying offences against devotees. Because, we may be dedicating our service, maybe worshiping the deity, doing book distribution, all the myriad of services we can do in Krishna consciousness. But if we're offensive to devotees and cultivate an envious attitude, then that's for sure our path to annihilation.
That's a good point, thank you. I think Prabhupada even mentioned somewhere in the Nectar of Devotion that one is engaged in worshipping the deity in the temple or in the home, wherever it is. If a Vaishnava appears, that we have to temporarily abandon our worship of the deities and serve the Vaishnavas. So conversely, if we're offensive to Vaishnavas, it's a very, very dangerous position, and it can nullify all of our good pieces of punya, of devotion. Thank you for that. Anything else? Yes?
Can you give more clarification on what Class A, B and C prisoners?
Well, the A, B and C prisoners are that it's like that. It's sort of like that example I gave you. You can escape from a material prison, like a prison house, and you're out in the material world, and that's another prison house. And if you think of Brahman, Prabhupada has said that if you think of Krishna as all, everything, that's also a type of prison. And the most devotees, most people who accomplish that level of realization come back to the material world. It's not perfection because it's not as pleasurable as devotional service. So Bhagavan can be, the sea level can be only in name, but to actually be a devotee of Bhagavan is not an easy or a guarantee thing. Even though, in parts of the world people gather around to hear the Hare Krishna song, they sometimes they think that the perfection of life is everything is one. And that's also a type of pitfall, according to Prabhupada. I mean, it is a step, but it's also a dangerous step. Baby steps are good, but there's danger, danger at every step. So I think that's all we have time for. Hare Krishna, thank you very much.